The story of Spice and Wolf originally began with the light novel, consisting of 17 volumes, published between 2006 and 2011. And while in 2016 new novels of the main series were being published, bringing us to a total volume count of 24 as of 2026, the core story of the series is still in this first 17 volumes, all of which are contained in the 10-year collection anniversary edition of Spice and Wolf, to which I will curse Amazon till the end of my days for the very state that my copy showed up in. What I mean is, since I own a copy, that is what I'll be using when I reference the Spice and Wolf light novel, as the story content is the same as the individual books. Moving on to the story adaptation itself, the main draw of the light novel series is the internal dialogue, meaning we get to see not just the conversations between characters, but a good portion of internal thoughts of whichever character we're following, which in the light novel will primarily be following the perspective of Lawrence. We can see how much Lawrence speculates with the information that he has in order to plan his steps towards his next goal, proving he does have a calculating side befitting of a merchant. The light novel also makes sure to be quite detailed of the environment, giving good-sized descriptions of the locations that he's been, the people that he meets, and how that can affect his trading and dealing. We also get quite a few anecdotes from Lawrence, often related to his experiences or techniques that he's learned as a merchant. For example, early on when Lawrence and Holo are waiting at the church and Holo's eating potatoes, and then she suddenly jumps up to catch a flea from her tail, Lawrence then recounts that merchants would often smoke their pelts in order to get them rid of fleas. This could be seen as secondary or not really relevant information, but it does wonders to build the world that they are in. Because of all of this additional information, you could consider the light novel as the full, complete experience, which you can digest directly by reading it at your own pace. But on the other hand, I can see people saying it feels slow or tedious to get through all this extra information, which might point them towards one of the other adaptations. And while it's few and far between, the light novel does set the standard of the art style that this series follows, primarily through the cover image of each light novel, along with a few colored illustrations teasing what's to come in that book. Then adding the few black and white images in the chapters themselves, we get a pretty good idea of what this art style entails. Most of our characters have rounder faces and features, which makes them feel a bit shorter and stockier. But since all the characters tend to follow these rules, it's not too hard to get used to. But books are about text anyway, so it's not that big of a deal breaker. Overall, if you consider that if the light novel wasn't good, we wouldn't have any of these other adaptations, I think that makes it easy enough to recommend. And shortly after the light novel began, what came next was the manga. Actually, hold on. Take another look at the cover image. We have the title and the volume number, along with the original author, the manga artist, and the character designer from the light novel, but then we have this. I'll come back to it in a bit. Carry on. The manga ran from 2007 to 2017, with a total of 100 chapters split across 16 volumes. And a detail that you've already likely noticed is the fact that manga is a visual medium, meaning that while we still get our speech and thought bubbles for internal and external dialogue, we now get much more art of the characters that we follow and the locations that they visit. So while we lose some of the descriptions that the light novel had of these locations, the fact that we can see them through the art means that we don't need their physical descriptions in text anymore. In fact, manga has the benefit of being able to show you pictures with their explanations, something which only text might still leave you confused. But enough about the medium. Let's talk about how this story differs from the light novel, and the two reasons behind the parental advisory. So picture this. You're nearing the end of the first chapter of the manga. We're getting to the scene of Lawrence checking on his wagon. Then we get the reveal of Holo in a colored page, because manga will have colored pages on special occasions, such as the end of the first chapter, to which we will then see Holo dressed in her finest birthday suit, as she then goes for a howl. Wait, Holo? Why did they give Holo's suitor bow ties? Literally no other adaptation does this. In fact, if we go to chapter 2, we can see hair dripping down just the right way, or just not drawing them in. Mannequin style. If you just did that all the way through, you wouldn't need the parental guidance warning. Which means they may have specifically wanted it. but I'm not going to point out names of who was specifically in charge of this aspect of the project, blessed he may be. But moving on, the second chapter of the manga shows how the Spice and Wolf story is being adapted and not copied one for one from the light novel. When we get to Holo's transformation, Lawrence does not fall down in fear. In fact, Lawrence goes as far as to touch the transformed paw, and even gets teased while doing so. But because Lawrence didn't become terrified, Holo ends up staying with Lawrence in the wagon, don't be dirty, the entire night. It's roughly the same information shared as the light novel, but it's an interesting alternative scenario that gives us more unique interactions between Lawrence and Holo, without deviating too far from the main plot hooks of the story. So while the light novel is still seen as the original, there's quite a good amount of unique content here too. Oh, and the nudity is actually quite few and far between. But when it appears, Holo? What? Lawrence? Next, let's talk about my, and likely many others' first exposure to the series, the anime. The original run of the Spice and Wolf anime ran from 2008 to 2009. Consisting of 24 episodes and 2 OVAs, it was basically 13 episodes a season. And something I'll mention right away, this is not a full story adaptation, with each season covering roughly 2 light novel volumes, with Season 1 covering Volume 1 and 2, and Season 2 covering Volumes 3 and 5. The reason for this is that in the 2000s, many anime were treated as advertisements for their source material, being either a light novel or manga, hence only making 1 or 2 seasons. Or at least, that's what happened here. But getting to the anime itself, while we've completely removed internal thought, outside of some flashbacks, we have better visuals in the manga, gaining both movement and full color. What truly makes the anime a step up is the addition of sound. We now have voices to each character. Tones which change the meaning of each word they speak. And sound effects such as wooden wagon wheels turning, footsteps through the grass, and most of all, we have music that accompanies each scene. It's one thing to immerse yourself in a world based off of the words that you read, utilizing your own imagination, compared to having the world immerse you directly by using the full extent of your eyes and ears. More on that later. Getting to the story of this adaptation, while I can say I thoroughly enjoyed my first watch of the series, after watching both seasons a few times since then, I've got a few different opinions. There are 2 specific changes that the anime makes to the story, which the light novel and manga did not have. The first is changing Yaorei, a male merchant in training living at the town of Paslo, to a girl named Chloe, to act as a rival love interest to Holo. Considering that we have several female characters introduced over the course of the story that fulfill the same role, meaning the only reason the swap was done this early was to create an immediate romantic hook, in spite of a similar character being introduced in the very next arc. Now the other change, it's going to sound a bit more complicated than it actually is. Information that we were supposed to get at the end of Volume 4 was moved to the end of Volume 3, so the anime could jump right into Volume 5 and skip the story content of Volume 4. This was to set up a better ending for Season 2, and to avoid spoilers, it's because Volume 4 is more like a step in the journey, while Volume 5 is more of a defining moment in the journey, which funnily enough relates to our next topic about the anime, the tone. Listen to this scene from the anime.
嘘をつく理由がわからない。じゃろ？嘘をつくとき、大事なのはその嘘の内容ではなく、なぜ嘘をつくかというその状況じゃ。
お前、俺がそれに気づくまでに何年かかったと思う。
気にすることはありんせん。主もまた小僧なのじゃからな。
She's a bit hoity-toity. The biggest change in the anime is Holo's demeanor, something I didn't realize watching the anime as a standalone. To not use too much time, an example goes like this. Anime Holo would say, They call me Holo, the Wise Wolf. While light novel Holo would say, they call me Holo the Wise Wolf for a reason, anime Holo gives off the feeling that she sees herself as superior and Lawrence is her lesser, while the light novel is more humble and amicable. And while there's an adaptation that makes it much easier to compare with, I'll have to save that for later. Meaning that the final change this anime run did was focus a bit too much on the plot. We lost a lot of the idle conversations, which not only built up Holo and Lawrence's relationship, but also gave some breathing room in the main plot, smoothing out the distance between the peaks and valleys. So if you were to binge several episodes of the anime at once, Holo would appear kind of moody, going from one extreme to another. As put in the words of my sweet mother, she's kind of a bitch. But while my opinions did change, I can still enjoy it. Did you know there are Spice and Wolf video games? Spice and Wolf, My Year with Holo. Originally releasing in 2008, the same year as the anime, this visual novel type game released in Japan on the Nintendo DS. And I'll quick confirm, this game did not have an official English translation. I mean, heck, the game didn't even release outside of Japan. But with the help of a fan translation, link in the description, and a few emulator shenanigans, us English fans can experience the game fully. And that's how I was able to get this footage, and this extra wide double screen thing going on. But moving on to the story, My Year with Holo is unique in that it basically runs its own original story that's separate from the light novel. You play as an unnamed merchant, that basically is Lawrence, who while peddling goods on foot in a town, comes across a deal that will get him his first wagon. But the wagon isn't acquired in silver, but with a contract. One stating that while the client will pay the upfront costs of the wagon, you must deliver the client to a certain but unspecified location, in which we learn the name of the client is Holo. After going to the meetup location, we inspect the wagon, and meet the once again dressed in her finest birthday suit, fluffy-eared and tailed Holo, directly, in which we find out that she wants us to take her to a place called the Ancient Forest. So now it's our job to find information on this location, all while trying to keep our coin purse full. To touch a little bit on the character dynamics, in the intro, it's stated that we only began trading on our own 6 months ago, after his master had retired. Compared to Lawrence's 7 years of experience on his own, we are truly, in Holo's definition, a young merchant, and yet Holo shows a much softer side than the anime, turning teasing into teaching moments instead of outright belittling. So while the story is unique and the character relationships are a bit different, it still feels like a Spice and Wolf story. But since it's also a game, let's talk gameplay. While Spice and Wolf My Year with Holo is technically classified as a visual novel, it's really made up of 2 parts. The first being the story side, clicking and reading through text, hearing the music, though a big plus is that many lines of dialogue are actually voiced, especially Holo, who has the same voice actor as the anime.
また無礼なことを考えておるな。まったく。主は疑り深いオスじゃの。
Yeah, the visuals and audio are a bit crunchy, but since both were compressed to fit on a handheld, there's not much you can do. Now the second part of the game is interesting, in that we control the wagon to move from town to town, buy and sell products, uncover information about new locations or trade opportunities, and depending on what and how well you do, go for one of 12 game endings. Add in trying to find all the random events and conversations with Holo, along with having your product knowledge carry over in New Game Plus, and you have quite a few hours of replayability. Luckily the game did well enough that a year later in 2009, we even got a second one. Spice and Wolf, The Wind That Spans the Sea. While not a direct sequel to the first game, it does have a number of improvements. More varied trade routes, products of different sizes, more influential contracts, and a different map. We also have more events and interactions with our main girl Holo, with more unique artwork and a different plotline from the first game. But this game also includes a buddy system, meaning that other characters can join us on our travels, such as Nora the Shepherd here, who also retains her voice actor from the anime. Another person we could possibly travel with is the Wandering Merchant, Eve, who also retains her voice actor from the anime. And then we also have Jailbait, whose name is Luca. The reason for the nickname is that each of these buddies can technically be romance, in addition to Holo, just like in the first game. Though the thing to note here is that you have a buddy in addition to Holo, not replacing Holo. So play things carefully, especially since you're not playing as me anymore, as you are now the actual Lawrence, who now also retains his voice actor from the anime. So while the first game has you play as an unknown merchant who meets Holo for the first time, the second game seems to go off of the anime, in which Lawrence and Holo have already started their journey. And since we have Eve as a character, who shows up in the second half of Season 2 in the anime, I'm guessing we don't have a pinpoint location for when this game's story actually begins. So other than utilizing familiar characters, we effectively have another unique story. With 4 times as many events as we now have 4 total companions, and the addition of achievements, plus high scores, there's plenty of content to discover and enjoy, giving you quite a few hours of playtime. But going back to what I said several minutes ago, let's get to an experience that, for being somewhat finite, in return, it has the best immersion out of all the adaptations. Spice and Wolf VR released in 2019. And I'll be candid, while the experience lasts for about an hour, the price is a bit high, which is made even higher for including the required headset. But since I already owned a VR headset and purchased this game when it was on sale, I was able to get gameplay for you to view directly. The premise is simple. Lawrence and Holo, seeking shelter from the rain, find a watermill to wait out this dreary weather. While Holo walks around and explores the watermill, we take the perspective of Lawrence, who decides to sit on a bench. So while Holo is conversing with Lawrence, she's interacting with Lawrence's physical location, aka you, while he responds to her actions and retorts. And at this point, you've likely noticed that the character models look a little different. They seem to resemble more the chibi illustrations from the light novel, instead of the full page or the manga character designs. So while the first impression might be off-putting, but when you see the fluid motion capture animations, with the voice actor from the anime giving you dialogue that feels like it came right out of the light novel,
どうかの主は損得で動いてばかりの商人じゃ。ついこの間も尻尾の手入れに欠かせぬ香油の購入で文句タラタラじゃったしの。
それは結局買ってやっただろう。
当たり前じゃ。主が甘えん坊の赤子のごとくわっちの尻尾が一緒に毛布の中にないと眠れぬとダダをこねるせいで毛並みがすぐにボサボサになってしまうからじゃ。しかもしょっちゅう寝相の悪さで尻尾を下敷きにしようって。わっちがどれだけ痛いのを我慢しておることか。
悪かったよ。
何がじゃ。
俺にとってお前こそがおとぎ話の幸運の女神だよ。
本当かよ。
ああ、本当だとも。
本当に。
本当の本当に。
たわけ。
悪かったって。
After that, can you honestly say that's not Holo? In addition to the story mode, is also a sandbox mode. Here, you can pet Holo's ears, pet Holo's tail, and have Holo pet you, along with a few other fun interactions. Though as was stated earlier, both of these modes get you about an hour of playtime. But while it is short, it is quite fulfilling. For when this story takes place, I assume it's early on in Lawrence and Holo's journey, but with no references to events or locations that took place, we can only assume. Now, in 2021, they did release a second VR game, but with how spoiler heavy that game is, I'd recommend clicking on the time code now if you want to stay spoiler free. You have until the screen turns white.
Nushi yo. Nushi yo. これ、主よ。これ。
なんだ、お前か。
まったく、中庭で昼寝とはわっちの旦那様はいい身分じゃな。
As you can see, this game takes place after the light novels. But they also have an additional surprise.
あのたわけなら朝方からバッチが用事を言いつけておったが。もうほんと臭い。呼んだ？うわー、すっごいたくさんの毛皮。ねえ父様、毛皮の山に飛び込んでみてもいい？
商品だからダメだ。
So if you didn't know and decided to watch anyway, Lawrence and Holo get married at the end of their journey. They end up running an inn, and together they have a child named Muri. And considering the cover image, they're not exactly hiding it. But having this game released in 2021 was meant to celebrate the light novel originally ending in 2011. Getting into the content, this game has a story mode just like the first game. The main difference being that it takes place in a new environment, the inn, and that we have conversations between both Holo and Muri. However, there is no sandbox mode like the first game. Instead, we have the titled Anime mode, in which Lawrence had purchased a film reel that happened to contain the first episode of the anime, in which Lawrence and Holo were giving color commentary into what they were thinking at the time, while also answering any questions that Muri had. So while it's still about an hour of content, and at the same price of the first game, it does provide a unique experience. Though what I find incredibly funny is that in the anime mode, they acknowledge Chloe's existence, which makes these games' stories canon with the 2008 anime adaptation. Because the very next year in 2022, they announce this. Spice and Wolf, Merchant Meets Wise Wolf. Coming out in 2024, this is the second anime adaptation of the Spice and Wolf story. And that's because we're not continuing where the 2008 adaptation left off, but instead, once again, starting from the beginning. Compared to the first anime, the story is mostly the same, but there are a few clear changes, with the most obvious being the art style. The backgrounds are as beautiful as always, but the biggest change is in the character designs. If we take a look at Holo, her features were rounded, and her eyes in proportion to her face are smaller, giving her an overall softer demeanor. Lawrence, on the other hand, has become a real man, gaining a chin and a jawline, in return for also making his eyes slightly smaller. He now has a more commanding presence, which also makes him feel like a more experienced merchant. If we were to compare Holo's formal suit, I think the winner's quite obvious. Though with these new character designs, Holo in particular got an attitude adjustment.
俺がそれに気づくまでに何年かかったと思う。
気にすることはありんせ。主もまた小僧なのじゃからな。
俺はそれに気づくまで何年もかかった。
気にすることはありんせん。わっちから見れば主もまた小僧なのじゃからな。
While the words being said is effectively the same, it's through the delivery that completely changes our perception of Holo's character, which makes her personality more well-rounded like the light novel, compared to the sharp and angular mood spikes of the first anime. What's also closer to the original light novel is the story of this adaptation, as we're back to having Yare as a man, though we do get what I believe is a little reference to Chloe. And with the first season of this adaptation having 25 episodes, we get to see the 4 books that were adapted, 6 episodes a book, were indeed books 1 through 4 in their exact order. And while there are a few scenes from the original anime that were cut down in this version, we instead got more of the everyday conversations between Lawrence and Holo that felt missing from and affected the pacing of the 2008 anime. So at this point, while I'd consider the Spice and Wolf light novel as the original story, Spice and Wolf, Merchant Meets the Wise Wolf, is in my opinion the definitive way to experience the Spice and Wolf story. And now that we have a teaser for Season 2 on the way, now it seemed like a good time to start a series going into the ins and outs of Spice and Wolf. Bonus. While researching for this video, I found out Spice and Wolf actually has an audiobook with Audible, narrated by the English voice actors of the anime. I didn't know anything about it, but apparently they started releasing them in 2022 and plan to publish the 17th novel in May next month of 2026, nearly 15 years after the light novel version published. But, yeah. Like and subscribe, I guess.